are listening to the Down the Wormhole podcast, exploring the strange and fascinating relationship between science and religion. This week, our hosts are...
I'm Rachel Jackson, rabbi at Agudas Israel Congregation in Hendersonville, North Carolina. And I do have a junk drawer in my house, and the weirdest thing in it is an orange peel peeler. And that's weird because, one, it's weird. Two, it's weird because we don't actually bring in oranges to the house. So it serves literally no purpose.
Zach Jackson, UCC pastor in Reading, Pennsylvania, and I have so many junk drawers in my house, and several of them have nothing in them except for wires and adapters to things that I don't have anymore, but one day might probably need, and so I can't get myself to part with them.
My name is Adam Pryor. I work at Bethany College in Lindsborg, Kansas. Probably the weirdest thing that resides in my junk drawer at my office is the European adapter for electronics. It's not like I'm traveling to Europe all that much. I probably could put it elsewhere, but it remains at the top drawer of my desk.
Oh, top drawer. Special
Been
place.
there a long time.
Ian Benz, Associate Professor of Elementary Science Education at UNC Charlotte. And strangest things I have in my junk drawer are several things I 3D printed for the kids that they slowly broke over time. And instead of throwing them away, they just end up in there. So nothing too exciting, but...
What did you 3D print?
Like just different areas of the Harry Potter stuff or containers or... Star Wars things, the usual. So, the usual stuff for my house.
I think that is actually an excellent explanation of what junk is. Something that's broken, or something that you don't use ever again, right? Like Zach, you said your wires and adapters and stuff like that. I mean, these are not things that we're using. I could have mentioned my floppy. For those young among you, that is something that you put into a computer a long time ago to store your information. It has less space than what you can send in a text message these days.
It looks like the save icon in Microsoft Word.
That's right. It actually used to be something. And when I say floppy, I actually have a floppy, not like those really hard floppies, but like the old big with the
like
giant hole.
Big ones?
Yeah, like that you could actually, bend back and forth. Literally zero purpose these days. So
Yeah.
that was my attempt at a segue, Zach, to say why are we talking about junk that we still keep and we haven't yet figured out how to throw it away?
Well, I have one, actually. Not a segue. Well, it is a segue, but a wire. I mentioned that I have so many wires and adapters in my life, and every time that one comes in handy, it just reinforces the bad habit of keeping all of them. But I don't even know if this one works anymore. And I have 1,000 micro USB cables anyway, so I'm just gonna throw it on the floor and ask you, do I have a moral responsibility to pick it up in my little recording studio?
Moral? I'm going to say no.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it's a morality issue.
It's on the floor behind me where it was for the past year at least.
Who else uses your recording studio?
Yeah, I mean, you got...
It's just me and sometimes a cricket or two.
And do the kids ever figure out a way to get in there?
No, it's in the basement.
Okay.
So what if I were to throw it in my living room on the floor? Do I have a moral responsibility to pick it up?
Well, your kids are old enough to know not to put wires in their mouth.
That doesn't mean they won't,
And
though.
there's probably wires everywhere else.
It is Zach.
So I'm going to go still with no on the morality.
Do I have a moral responsibility to pick it up if I throw it in the yard?
Oh, definitely in the yard. But I'm going to go yes on the living room, too.
Okay, Adam is the more moral of the group here today.
I'm still struggling.
No one
good
is
to know.
surprised by that.
I guess I want to know, like, what would be your specific definition of moral responsibility?
I don't know. We're going to get to that later. Right now, just go with your gut.
I think you have a responsibility.
So I threw it in my backyard that I own. I threw it in my backyard in the grass.
Yes.
Do I have a moral responsibility to clean it up in my backyard?
Yes.
Did you sign a covenant when
Okay.
you moved into that area that you had to keep your backyard a certain way? Then yes.
Or you could have a car in your
Lord
yard.
knows I did not. Because it is full of plastic junk from my kids, the toys that they have that my dogs have chewed on.
Yeah.
So, okay. Now you're starting to get a little bit more that I'm a monster. So what if I were to be walking down outside and it falls out of my pocket into a river? Do I have a moral responsibility to get it out of the river?
Yes. As long as you don't kill yourself.
If
trying
you're
to do so.
impacting, now you're starting to, even though you could argue that you're impacting other species in your backyard, you definitely are in there. The argument.
What if I were
easier.
walking past a launch pad and of a rocket that was going into deep space, and I taped it to the outside of it? It's just going to end up out in deep space. Do I have a moral responsibility to not do that?
Yes, but there's a couple things I really want to unpack in that scenario.
What kind of clearance do you have that you get that close
like
to a rock?
how you're able to get that close to it. I if you're able to do that, I
I'm
would
not
like
at liberty to discuss my
It's a Nasaku.
Yeah.
Sorry, too soon.
There may or may not be a picture of me standing in front of the Orion prototype space capsule that they were designing years ago. And they said, now make sure you don't touch it. And my hand is behind me, just resting on the prototype. But it was never going to go into space. And that was like 11 years ago. So I think statute of limitations is out. So I'm okay.
Right, getting it off your conscience.
Yeah.
If
Yes.
anyone from the FBI is listening
That's right.
today.
I'm going to answer your question, though, and still say yes.
Okay. So then, like, Elon Musk sending his Tesla Roadster into deep space. It's not deep space. It's in a heliocentric orbit right now.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, is that a breach of some kind of moral responsibility to the universe? To intentionally litter like that?
Well, I think it was what he was doing.
Yeah.
Why did he send his car up there?
It's a PR stunt.
People to pay attention.
Because he could, is the answer.
But
And then, yes.
you then look at the what that stunts like that can do to increase interest in space exploration. So, as we've discussed in the past.
So now you've got a utilitarian sense of morality here.
A little bit. But then you also have the thought of, and this was interesting. I just started watching last week, I guess it was, the second series of Cosmos that Neil deGrasse Tyson did that came out last year. And in it, he talked about one of the spacecraft that was, plunged into Jupiter's atmosphere to blow up. And the reason why they did that. And it was, they had that responsibility of making sure that their concern was if they did not do that, it could eventually impact one of Jupiter's moons, which could have a pretty potential significant issue emerge there because of us littering and impacting that ecosystem. I guess for a more general.
Is that because they were not sure if life exists on those moons?
Yes.
And they were worried about potentially impacting some microbial life on those moons? Because this is where I want to take this conversation today. I'm really interested in thinking and talking about space junk and our moral responsibility as humans for the junk we leave in space. Because
Grow up, boys.
Adam doesn't want to laugh first. You did too.
I didn't say anything. I'm just sitting here.
A couple of grown adults in this place.
I'm sorry, Zach. I just had to interrupt because our listeners can't see faces and nonverbal
I'm gonna push through
communication.
that.
So,
Just gonna push right through.
yeah, I couldn't.
Look, we were
not
just doing like the human body and stuff in homeschool and sex ed with my son, so he's learning all the names for slang for private parts. So this has been excellent for me.
Well, teach him space junk.
And the Ian.
Oh,
Don't forget to talk to him about the Ian, okay?
The Ian.
That's right.
The Ian and space junk.
Ian. Yeah.
Got it.
All right. Sorry, Zach. You're very passionate about space junk.
I am passionate about space junk. Thank you, Rachel. And not the kind that you're talking about, not astronaut junk. I'm talking about like stuff, trash, space trash.
There you go.
How about that? Space garbage.
Debris.
Because like my illustration with the USB cable, when I threw it on the ground in my studio, it only affects me. And so it seems like, well, he probably doesn't have any kind of moral responsibility here. He's not sinning against someone else by littering his own space. Upstairs, it was like, well, that's a shared space. It might impact another human. Outside, even though it was my yard, y'all were pretty much like, this is not okay. Like the moment it leaves my house, it could potentially affect wildlife, and it's sullying some patch of nature that I have. And it seems like once we start to talk about how things affect other living things, then it feels like we have some kind of moral responsibility. And there's a lot of religious language throughout most religious traditions that I can think of about this. Like my favorite example from the Bible is when God is telling them how to properly siege a city, and is like, go ahead, do your war thing, siege them, starve them, kill them, whatever, but don't you dare chop down their fruit trees, because you are not at war with trees. And if you chop down the fruit trees, then you're done for.
Yep.
Where
it's
best.
Like,
don't sully nature. That nature has rights in and of itself. I think that's pretty easy for us to get to. But then when it talk about like minerals and rocks and non-living things, then it gets a little kind of iffy. And Rachel wants to pop out and say something.
I was raising my hand. I didn't want to interrupt, but I really wanted to take that idea and just throw in a little bit of information. Us Jews have a holiday that's actually coming up. I don't know exactly when we're going to be publishing this article versus when this show today versus when we're talking about it. But this year, the holiday is called Tu B'Shvat, and it is the New Year of the Trees. And it happens at the end of January, where we literally celebrate all the gifts that the trees have given us. The fruits, the nuts, the shade, the planting, our connection. And we use the phrase Baal Tashchit, masters or stewards of all creation. And it's all creation. It's not just a tree. So that goes into your rocks, right? Rocks are a part of its creation. So I just wanted to insert that here. So
I love that. I love that so much. And I think that probably will have passed by the time that this episode launches. This will be 2 weeks from now. So yeah. So we will have celebrated the trees.
So I just, if you don't mind me interrupting, I just shared a link in our chat to space.com's page on space junk, and happened to see that Netflix is apparently releasing a sci-fi film about space junk salvage in February.
Really?
Yeah.
And all of these will be in the show notes.
Now that's an excellent segue, Ian, because as a part of our new Patreon perks, for those who give $5 or more a month, the second Sunday of every month at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, we're having a Netflix watch party where we're watching together through this wonderful service where we can watch it and chat in real time together, as long as you have a Netflix account, and watch these things and talk about it. So we are definitely going to watch a movie about space junk if it's coming up on Netflix
in February.
And thank you for that.
It'd be our first one.
Maybe we'll make that our first one. I'll have to watch it first. If it's garbage about garbage, then maybe not. But, and then we can watch that octopus movie or something.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, so amazing.
The second is on Valentine's Day.
Oh,
so
it's amazing.
I love cephalopods. But we're not talking cephalopods, though they are kind of alienish, and maybe they are from another planet, and we should respect them. But anyway.
Back to junk and rocks.
Back to space garbage. Because I don't know if you know, listener at home, but space junk is a big, big problem. And because it's not something that we see, we don't think about it as a problem. Like about the Great Garbage Patch in the Pacific, because we've got video of this and boats that go through all the garbage and whatnot. And we've all seen pictures. Those of us who were alive in the 90s can remember seeing those soda rings around the necks of the turtles. And whoever had the public service project to convince us to clip those things needs to be the one in charge of getting people to wear their masks, because I feel like that was a really good program. But anyway, currently, according to the U.S. Space Surveillance Network, they are tracking 23,000 pieces of debris the size of a softball or larger in our orbit, and an additional 500,000 objects larger than a centimeter also orbit Earth, which might not seem like a whole lot, but when you think about how fast are things moving through orbit, like tens of thousands of miles per hour.
17,500 miles an hour.
17,000? It has the power, even something that's like the size of like a walnut has the power to go through the space station if it is going at that speed. And so it doesn't have to be something giant in order to cause a big problem to other things that are up there. I mean, we've had 9 active satellites that have been destroyed or disabled by debris. The space station crew have had to jump into their escape capsules a number of times because they thought they might collide with something. And so right now, there are currently 6,000 satellites circling our planet. Okay, we've only ever launched about 10,000 ever. So there's 6,000 up there right now doing their work. They're the ones that are giving us GPS and are giving us telecommunications, that are taking pictures of Earth, that are giving us data about hurricanes and storms and climate, and all the things that make the modern world work are happening because of these 6,000 satellites. And only about 40% of those are actually working right now. 60% of satellites up there are dead and are just orbiting as dead pieces of junk. Worth noting, of those 6,000 that are up there, about 1,000 of them are from SpaceX as a part of the Starlink web of satellites that they're putting up there to send high-speed internet to the whole world. They've got 1,000 up there right now. They have permission to send up 12,000 total to create this web around the world so that they can sell internet to every part of the planet. So imagine going from 6,000 to 12,000 just from them. And they've got a proposal to the FCC right now to bump that number up to 42,000 satellites from 30. Just SpaceX. And that's just one company. They're not the only ones who are trying to make this satellite internet thing work. Amazon got approval last year to send up 3,000 more. OneWeb is another one that is sending up thousands and thousands more. So there is currently no law about getting rid of those satellites once they've been up there. There's a standard that NASA sets for American ones that after they're done working, they should come down within 25 years, which is kind of very generous. But they don't have to. There's no law. There's no rule. And there's no
punishment.
There's no borders up there. So who's enforcing this? Even the UN has these like handshake agreements with countries, but they don't have to do that. And if like a defunct satellite crashes into a functioning satellite, the country whose satellite crashed into it is supposed to pay for the damages, but they can just say, well, nobody saw it happen. We don't know exactly whose satellite that was.
Can't prove it with me.
So nobody will pay out for this, and nobody is going to take care of it. And we are about to find ourselves in a really bad situation through something called the Kessler effect. Have you all heard of this?
You should talk about it.
It's basically an awful cascade of destruction in low Earth orbit, in which if you have a big satellite that crashes into another satellite, it will create a spray of pieces, which will then crash into other ones, which will then crash into other ones and other ones until they're all crashing into each other and blocking out all communication and all satellites. And then you just have this impassable ring of junk surrounding our planet.
Yeah.
This is not something that's like science fiction. NASA itself says that if we were to stop sending satellites today and nobody sends any more satellites up into space, we will continue to have more and more space junk forming because of these collisions that are already happening. So it will not be enough to just be more responsible with our satellites from here on out. We have to develop ways of cleaning up the stuff that's up there right now.
The active debris removal.
Yeah, the active debris removal. Probably the biggest target right now is the Envisit satellite. It was a weather satellite. It's one of the largest ones that was ever sent up by the ESA, the European Space Agency. It's going to take another 150 years to come down on its own. It's massive. And they calculate that it passes within 600 feet of at least 2 cataloged pieces of space junk every year. And if something were to collide with that would be like, there we go, Kessler effect. We're starting to knock out satellites left and right, and we're screwed.
Does that mean we wouldn't be able to record anymore? Because right now we've always been virtual, but we got to do something about this. It means we can't record this podcast.
That's right, listeners. This podcast might be in trouble, and this is the primary concern. People. Call your representatives.
I want to hear that phone call. Down the wormhole may go down the wormhole if you guys don't fix this problem. So,
oh man. Luckily, the ESA is going to fix this, or so they say. Well, they're planning to send up a small garbage truck, essentially, that is going to go up and grab it with little robot arms, give it a big hug, and then pull them both into the planet and burn them both up. So it's essentially a suicide mission for the little garbage truck. Except it's going to cost $140 million to go up and get rid of one satellite in orbit. So that's not good.
One,
it doesn't scale very well.
I think we could tell the little engine that could variation on the garbage truck cleaning up space junk. I just say that's a children's book that I would buy. But there is there is this like real question of like the cost of cleaning up space junk really, really makes it difficult to justify doing it. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I mean, when you talk about it being $140 million to basically pull down one unused satellite, right? Out of the tens of thousands that are there, it becomes a really difficult prospect to sell. And you can pretty quickly see why space junk becomes a real problem, right? Like, I mean, essentially we sort of half-cocked just started shooting stuff off into space and said, it'll be okay. We'll never get to a point where we've put so much up there that it'll be a problem, right? This is like, it was like, democratic hoarders, right? We were just like, we can just keep putting stuff up there. It'll be, we won't ever have to worry about it again. It's okay.
Who cares?
Right. It's space. Who cares? It'll go away.
Yep.
Right. Like, and in roughly 50 to 60 years time, we filled up the attic. is I think the analogy worth drawing. Like, maybe our little space robot that could be compared to the little engine that could also be called American Pickers. Right?
So, I'm looking at something right now and I'm seeing something called End of Life Services by Astroscale demonstration mission. That apparently, is this the one you're talking about? Something you're talking about? I just put it in our chat. It's being launched. What is it? The test Astroscale to test space junk cleanup tech with a launch in March, apparently.
A lot of this technology has never been tried before.
Right.
And it relies on a whole lot of really complicated physics because you need to get up there. You need to, we don't know if like this gigantic telescope, we don't know if it's tumbling right now, which will complicate how it interacts with the garbage truck, because you need to be able to harness it and then move it in such a way that it then collides with Earth without hitting any other satellites. And even when it grabs it, it's not going to grab it and then fall down in 10 minutes.
Right.
We're talking about it gradually then coming back down. A lot of different space agencies have worked out some other things. There's some, the Japanese especially have been working on some microbots, think a foot little cubes that have nets.
That's what I've been thinking about.
Seems so low tech, right? That you'd send a little cube into space with a net that would then a net and then a sail.
Mm-hmm.
So it grabs it with the net, throws the sail up, and it throws off the orbit until it falls into Earth.
They're going to Marie Kondo space.
This does not bring me joy anymore.
This one doesn't bring me joy. So, shoot out the harpoon and attach a net to it. Let it bring itself down.
But actually, this idea of a net, especially for the little things, right? I mean, the giant one, yes, that needs a very particular piece. But I mean, Zach, as the things you were talking about, right? 23,000 things, the size of a marble. Or the size of a golf ball is what they're tracking. Those are not big. They don't necessarily need all these huge things. And I'm just thinking about, again, no disrespect to all the major physicists out there who do incredible work. I don't have that brain. I don't know what they do. But I'm thinking we pick up, dirt from Mars. Right? We figured out how to collect rocks from Mars, from Earth. It feels like we could send something to the LEO, the low Earth orbit, have it reach out and grab things, right? The claw, right? 50 cents, put your claw in. Which one are you going to, right? Which toy, which cuddly you're going to get out. And you just put it in your net or just take a little net and sweep it, because if they're tracking it, they know where it is. So they can go after it and find him and gotcha. Right? A video game, right? We just need some video gamers. Just be at the controls and be I'm gonna get it. So it's a huge problem. I get that. I also wonder if we are making it more complicated than it has to be. Why are we making fun of the low tech solution, right? Keep it simple.
No, the Russians are working on this this awesome idea with this sticky foam.
Yeah.
That it comes near it and it shoots it with the sticky foam, and then then keeps going and then sticks something else to it and then something else to it, like Katamari Damacy, like that PlayStation game where he keeps rolling the ball bigger and bigger and bigger until it falls into the earth. That's something that they're actually working. So there's a couple of logistical issues. Obviously, there's a million of them, but we don't know whose junk this is. Oh. Some of them, like the satellites, we know whose it is. But all of the booster rockets that are up there, there's lens caps from the different satellites. There's all these bolts and pieces of paint and stuff that we don't know who it belongs to, and it's going to cost a lot of money to clean it up.
One of the Hubble servicing missions several years ago, when one of the astronauts, the tool slipped from his hand, and it slowly floated away, and now it's just orbiting. And we got all little things like that, right? So.
Yeah, so you think like this European mission is going to cost $140 million to clean up one satellite. So who's going to fund something that's hundreds of millions of dollars to clean up someone else's garbage when you think like we have issues at home we have to deal with. We're dealing with COVID and with our economies and having to modernize our energy sector. We can't be spending hundreds of millions of dollars to clean up the Chinese satellites. They need to pony up and do this. And so we've got this international issue of convincing other countries to pay for it when we don't want to pay for it.
Doesn't that go to your morality question?
It does. Thank you very much.
I mean, to my mind, right, like it's a variation of what sometimes gets called like the collective inquiry issue, right? So when we can't attribute direct responsibility, right? Or when we can even sort of like widen this a little bit, right? When the ties of responsibility have become so tenuous because they've been so distanced for so long that we can't reasonably reattribute to them, right? We run into this issue of how it is that you democratically motivate people to deal with that issue, right? I think, to my mind, right, the space junk problem looks a lot like the problem that we face in environmental ethics. Like those are part and parcel, right, of the same issue, right? How you deal with cleaning up the ocean is not different than how you deal with cleaning up space. And as a species, we've been pretty bad at dealing with the sorts of moral and ethical problems that stem from these questions of collectivity. We're just not real good at it, right? Which kind of makes sense, right? If you think evolutionarily, we had great systems for dealing with moral problems with a definite actor. Cast that person, sorry, my language was slipping. Cast that person out, right? They're no longer part of the community. Everything's fine. If they die off in the wilderness by themselves, no big deal, right? Because everyone else has bought into this collective ideal and we can hold on to a sense of responsibility. But, our sort of notion of nation states and the way that we've organized don't deal with these collective problems that span more than one place. And I would argue, right, when it comes to space junk, relying on something like place-based ethics, right, or thinking about our moral accountability in terms of that like in-group, out-group situation based on place is going to fail real bad over and over and over again. There's your happy note for the day.
It's a wonderful bit of symbolism that all of the American flags on the moon are bleached white at this point because of the sun. And there's the lack of atmosphere on the moon. That like we went up there as a triumph of American exceptionalism in the face of the USSR. And we are the greatest nation in the world. We planted all these flags up there, but like they're all white now. That it's fairly meaningless that it was Americans that did that and not the Chinese or the Russians or someone else. It would have been the same flag now.
Right.
That's beautiful.
white flags and bags of poop, right? That's what we left behind.
Well, and I think then it gets back down to like the morality question of who decides what is moral. Right? Like the you were talking about moral responsibility.
Is that moral relativity?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who gets to determine if it's a moral responsibility or not? And then if it is agreed to that it's a moral responsibility, like who agrees to that? And then, you'll still have
right. Like,
argument.
it's hard for you all to hear that you're morally deficient because you leave things in your living room. But
Exactly.
I know that's the case.
So
Don't come to my house then. I'm a really immoral person.
Yeah.
I want to push on this. I mean, and I'm just moving past Adam's downer. Thank you for that.
you could just take that out, Zach, and
I don't think we've asked the question, why do we care? So in relation to Adam's statement that, well, it's very similar to Earth ecosystem based, in the oceans, and we see all the garbage and the fat and whatever, right? We have all these horrible pictures from around the world. And we care because we live here. We care, right? We care about the Amazon rainforest because that's how we breathe, right? That it becomes, okay, we get it. What's in it for me? Well, that I actually can live in a place, that I can breathe in a place, that I'm not going to die. It's very social. It's very human-centered. In space, we don't live there. We're not even planning on living there. We're planning on living on another planet, but we're not planning on living in space. So if we're thinking about, part of the question is, why is this a moral responsibility? And also, why should I care? Truly, why should I care about space junk? Is it because, as you were saying, that it's about, well, it's gonna one marble is gonna run into something the size of a marble is gonna run into a satellite, and that satellite is gonna run into all the other satellites, and then things are gonna come crashing down. So what? So we're just put back into the 1950s before all the satellites were put up there? Then it's really just human-centered, and that's just really, if that's our issue, then that's one reason to clean it up so that we can maintain this lifestyle that we want, that with SpaceX, everybody in the world can have high-speed internet, right? That everyone can use data from no matter where you are, on the top of the Himalayas down into the Gobi Desert, wherever. And if that's our goal, fine. But is our goal to keep space clean? For what purpose other than us and our comfort and our lifestyle? Why do I care?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nobody cared about space junk until it started potentially affecting us.
Right.
When it was just floating there, it doesn't matter.
Is it then our living room? So, Zach, when you're talking about our podcasting sound room, is that just an expansion of the human? Is that just our house? And does it actually matter? Or is it out there? Is it out in the public sphere?
I have a story. It's not a downer story, I promise.
Okay.
Despite the fact that I just want to be clear, you teed that up so well for us to go way downhill, and I'm going to resist the urge.
Thanks.
So instead, I'll tell this happy story, right? Like, so when I was buying a house, I was talking with a biology professor, and we were comparing notes about using floor sanders and why you would or wouldn't, and how that works, and why it's a messy process and it's horrible and really difficult to do. And he put this quip in my mind, which just sort of reshaped, right, the way that I was thinking about this process, right? So I live in a house that's over 100 years old now. And as I think about the projects that need to be done on it, I keep in mind this bit where he said, I think about the fact that even in the house that I own, I'm just renting it until the next person moves in, right? This sense that even in a place where there's maybe the most iconic symbol of private property that we have, particularly in the US, right? That it's really a space that you're temporarily using, right? In 40, 30, 20, 30, 40, 50 years' time, right? Someone else will be building upon and dealing with and inheriting the consequences of the strange decisions that the Swedish carpenters in this town have made about how to deal with sagging beams, right? Framing our sense of belonging in terms of that notion of sharing, renting, or, right, if we want to take a little more of a religious turn, right, being gifted for this time, I think really drastically changes the way in which we think about that notion of responsibility. But I think if we don't do that, it's really hard for me to come up with a leg to stand on other than we're all going to die if we don't deal with this, right? By which to motivate a set of moral actions, right? Like, to my mind, I look at space junk and I'm like, you have two options. We're all going to die, so you better take care of it, right? Which I think is hard for people to fathom, right? It goes up there, it's gone. Or this isn't my space to do whatever I want in.
That is something that transcends space junk and is really something that we are reckoning with in a post-colonial world. That whatever you think, whatever you own, whatever land you land on, that the earth is just a dead thing you can claim.
These are the colors of
But
the wind.
I know every rock and tree and creature. Right? I mean, I don't know if that's going to mess with our copyright singing Pocahontas, but no, that is this feeling of entitlement that we can walk into any space on Earth, no matter if someone's living there or not. We can fly into any space on the planet, in orbit, onto other planets, and we don't need to think too much about what we do and leave there.
Until it impacts us.
Mm-hmm.
Until it impacts us. Now, I mean, you've mentioned last time, Adam, how much work NASA puts into sterilizing things because they don't want to bring any life to another planet because they don't want to contaminate it, because they want to know if there is life on another planet. And so it seems like we've got a hint of this, but only when it is potentially impacting another life form. We don't have a good way of motivating us to think about inert forms of matter.
Yeah. Blame Aquinas.
I would love to.
Right, well, I mean, we could blame
for those of us less familiar with him.
Yeah. When in doubt, I like to blame Aquinas before anyone else.
That's fair.
No, this is basically a variation of the great chain of being. Why is it easier to, how do we determine what has moral worth and to what extent, right? Life is more complicated and higher up on the chain of being than rocks. Life gets more, right? Complicated life that reacts to us gets more than simple life that doesn't seem like it does anything, right? Animals,
amoebas,
plants, right? Yeah. So you can play this game out, right? Like, this is what Aquinas is deeply, deeply famous for, right? Like, laying out the great chain of being in an explicit scholastic fashion, right? This was the structure of doing like moral ethics through the Middle Ages. I mean, unless you were Neoplatonic, but then you weren't in with the Vatican, and so nobody read your stuff until like at least 600 years later. I mean, those people were cool, but if you did the scholastic thing, like, it's no wonder that we ended up with this very strong sense of property and also of a hierarchy of the complicatedness of features entailing more ontological and moral worth.
But the same Bible that Aquinas was using declared that when God created the lifeless sun and moon and earth, declared it was good.
Yeah. But, I mean, clearly not quite as good as us, right?
Not very good.
Yeah, there's no qualifier.
No, but very good happens only after humans are created.
Right? And it happens in a nice order. I mean, I needed that so that we could do these cool things later that were way more complicated and fun. I mean, like, so, yeah, I mean, it's good, but it's not super good and really, really exceptionally good. Like, we could still
Look, God said it was very good when humans were created, but not 3 chapters later, God says, I regret this whole thing. We're done. So I would not put too much stock in that.
Let me just say, I don't like Aquinas. I like all those Neoplatonic people that didn't get read. But I do think
Such a hipster theologian.
Right? Like, I do think like it has been a serious, right? Like the simplicity of the great chain of being and the ways in which it has carried over in different philosophical and religious traditions has carried a lot of weight that puts us into a lot of the problems we face now. And getting rid of it is really hard.
When you look at like I just was remembering, with Skylab and Muir and when they came down, right? And there was all of the talk, especially when Muir came down, of making sure, I mean, when you think about it, the goal is when things re-enter the atmosphere and we know they're not going to totally burn up, it's to try to get it to land in the ocean. And then if I remember correctly, the hope is to try to clean up as much as you can, but we know that's not possible to get everything type deal. So they try to make sure that they have enough fuel and stuff to be able to do the appropriate burns to make sure it lands in the ocean and not on land, where if it lands in the ocean, it's less likely to impact humans. Right.
This guy.
So it comes back to that whole, will it impact us? Will it impact our species or not? I mean, I don't recall a lot of conversation when those two, when Skylab and Muir were coming back in of, well, what's going to be the impact on the marine life? I'm not saying it didn't happen. I just don't remember that being the big part of the conversation. It was more of a, let's make sure it doesn't hit land so it doesn't hurt humans.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And even SpaceX recently had to change the design of their Starlink satellites to take out some of the iron components that wouldn't totally burn up on reentry. Well, there was like a 1 in 1,000 chance that it wouldn't fully burn up. They totally changed their design so that it would completely burn up in the atmosphere, and you don't have a risk of hitting a person, because they didn't want a lawsuit, essentially, if one of their satellites were to break someone's house. When in the entire history of recorded humanity, one person has ever been hit by a meteorite.
Oh, but there's far fewer meteorites than there are satellites.
Yes, no, that's true.
So just put that one out there, right? And we haven't had that many years of things coming out of space that we put there.
And can I just mention, this was Ann Hodges, and she was napping on the couch, and a meteorite crashed through her house and bounced and hit her. The podcast, wow. The Memory Palace, has a wonderful vignette about this story and about the tragedy of how the landlord screwed her over and got rich while she stayed poor. And she's the only person who we know that ever got hit by a meteorite. Huh. But anyway, on top of this, in the reentry, a lot of folks are now worried too that a lot of those metallic particles that are burning up in the atmosphere are going to remain in the upper atmosphere. And we don't really know fully the impact on climate, on further whatever's up there in the upper atmosphere. Like, what if there's just a ton of aluminum up there? Is that going to be reflecting sunlight? We don't really know. So the Japanese are actually working on wooden satellites, which is so steampunk. I love it. Putting together these special wooden alloys of I don't know. They're still working on it, but they're hoping that in the next 10 years, they'll be able to make wooden satellites. I mean, with metal components on the inside, but the outside is made out of wood. And if there's any people group who can engineer like carpentry,
right,
engineer, it's the
them.
Japanese. Their carpentry is legendary. And I have every bit of faith in them to be able to do it. But like, that's another issue that we haven't even thought about. We could be affecting the climate of the Earth without realizing it so that we can have high-speed internet on top of Mount Everest.
I will say, while I love like the stuff NASA does and that kind of thing, I do think the Japanese Space Agency is just working in creative ways that do not get nearly enough attention, and have done some amazing projects that really deserve a wider eye from the general public. It would be worth talking about at some point, like why it is the case that it probably hasn't, and sort of like how that factors in terms of public media and stuff. But I had not heard about wooden satellites, and I have to say that has now brightened my day. It's also made me think about wonderful assignments to propose to students going forward.
That's right.
Right? It's like some kids in elementary school did the egg drop experiment.
Yes.
And like have never stopped thinking
That's
about
pretty
it.
much it, right? Like I'm like, we could definitely do some
in Adam's class, they're going to design wooden satellites.
Wooden satellite design. I don't have, right? And then they'll just need to write a moral justification not based on the Great Chain of Being.
I am so glad that we're friends and you're not my teacher, because that...
Yeah. There are definitely things you've talked about doing in your class. I've thought, I don't know if I could do that.
That sounds like a lot of fun in my spare time, but man, that would...
Oh, man.
Don't worry. I'm teaching religion and science this semester, so there'll be all sorts of ideas coming from here to those poor students. The 10 of them don't know what they've signed up for.
And now that they've listened to this, we're sorry.
Yeah, because apparently Adam's students listen to the podcast.
Exactly.
No, only the former ones. The ones that are actually in class are too busy.
So, yeah.
With their existential dread. By the way, I have not watched the trailer yet for Netflix's Space Sweepers, a South Korean sci-fi adventure movie based on those going up to clean up space junk. But Screen Rant says it looks like Netflix's version of Guardians of the Galaxy. And so, I don't know. We may need to watch this next month.
Yeah.
If
This feels like a winner.
Exactly.
I mean,
I almost want to watch it without watching it first, so that our
so you
first
can
time
react
watching
together.
it is on the 14th.
Yeah.
What a great Valentine's Day present that is.
Yes.
I just want to plug our Patreon one more time. That $3 a month gets you exclusive audio content, including some guided meditations that Rachel, the wonderful overachiever, has already recorded, and all the rest of us are still working on. And $5 a month gets you these Netflix watch parties, in which it seems like a great idea that we're going to watch the Space Sweepers this month. So check out the website, check out all of that, and we'll see you then.